Hello, thanks everyone. Good to see you all, and I miss you. I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, as Miranda mentioned, this is perfect to talk about after Dominique just shared her experience with her daughter being diagnosed through newborn screening and also pursuing a family planning option herself. So I am going to be talking about the Family Planning Toolkit or the Reproductive Options Toolkit that Remember the Girls is creating. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and my ALD story. In 2001, my dad was diagnosed with cerebral ALD, and at the same time, we found out that I was a carrier of the condition. As we know, all daughters of males with the disease will be carriers. At the time, my family was told, not to worry. We had to focus on my dad and his illness. And that, being a carrier is only something that I would have to think about when I was about to have kids. My dad passed away about 2 years after his diagnosis. So you can see some pictures of us here. He was in hospice care living in our house. So there's a picture of us in his hospital bed and also feeding him before he lost the ability to swallow. Growing up, I always knew that I was a carrier. My mom was really open with me about being a carrier of ALD and explaining to me every few years, like what that meant for my future. I knew that, one day when I had kids, I would be having to make certain choices and decisions that other girls wouldn't have to make. And then when I was 12, she took me to the Kennedy Krieger Institute to see a genetic counselor who really explained, more about these family planning options to me. I also have an older cousin who's a carrier. And when I guess this probably was about almost 10 years ago now. So when I was in middle school, she was going through the IVF with PGT process to make sure that she, didn't pass the ALD gene down to any children that she had. And, so that gave me a lot of reassurance to know that, even though I was able to pass this condition down, that I did have options. As I got older, I started learning that, these are not very accessible. It really depends, as Dominique talked about, on insurance coverage and where you live, which is extremely unfortunate. And something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But I've been involved in this community for a really long time. I've written a lot about my story, spoke a lot about my story as a carrier. And in high school, I really started learning more, about what being a carrier meant. I also started learning that, there is a chance of developing physical symptoms when I got older, and just really started getting more involved in the community. I joined a lot of Facebook groups, especially as a young person. Facebook was just the place that I always turned to. I just grew up like being on social media. And I also started my own group for other young adult carriers. At the time, I was like 16, and I felt that there were certain topics facing young carriers that I thought having our own like forum to talk about could be really beneficial. Like those of us, especially who didn't have children yet, or maybe, were starting new relationships and wondering what kind of thing you should say when you start a new relationship with someone, if you should tell them you're a carrier, when should you tell them you're a carrier. So I created that group when I was 16. So that was about 7 years ago, and still run that group today. This is when I also began learning more about the options from, meeting with a genetic counselor, seeing my cousin go through IVF, and also just seeing women in these Facebook groups sharing their experiences with, the things that they did. Also, I want to call out that I am using the term carrier in this presentation really for only in the reproductive sense. We know that most women with ALD do have symptoms and that we're not just carriers. But since I will be talking about the full X-linked disease community as well, I'm using the term carrier, but just know that, we are women with ALD. As I got more involved in carrier advocacy, I started meeting new people on social media and researching, and I discovered that there were so many other X-linked conditions. and that carriers in those communities were struggling with the same things that women in the ALD community were. So, having physical symptoms, but not having many resources to learn about their symptoms or that many studies. Also having that 50% chance of passing down their condition, and, needing family planning options, and also the mental health, the grief, guilt, fear of the future. That was such a common theme that I saw across these conditions. And it really just clicked in my mind that we needed to bring women from these rare X-linked diseases together. Like, our ALD community is so strong, but obviously we are a rare disease. So I thought, why don't we bring these women together from all these rare X-linked conditions, since we're really all pushing for the same things. So that's why I formed Remember the Girls in 2017. And the main mission is just to bring all these carriers together to advocate for the issues that affect us. And one of those main issues is accessing information about family planning options. So why is family planning so difficult? As I said, all carriers do have a 50% chance of passing the condition down. So, if they had a girl, 50% chance the girl would be a carrier, and a 50% chance that a son they had would have the ALD gene. There are many different options and ways that a family might want to approach family planning. Everyone's situation is so different and depends on so many different factors. This list isn't even fully comprehensive, but some of the options include, natural conception with testing after birth, testing during the prenatal phase, doing IVF with PGT or in vitro with pre-implantation genetic testing, doing egg or embryo adoption, classic adoption, or just choosing not to have children. So there are a full list of options, and it's definitely challenging to figure out what the decision is best, for yourself as, a carrier, and also for your entire family. Like, there's a lot of things to consider, like, morally, ethically, if you have certain religious beliefs, financially. This can also be difficult to talk to about with other members in your family, or even friends, if they don't fully understand your position and might have certain judgments to say about certain family planning options. It's definitely still seen as somewhat of a taboo subject, and I think that can really get in the way of women being able to have open conversations about family planning, and also just access like unbiased information that really lays out what all their options are. There's a lot of resources that do exist, that talk about IVF or talk about egg donation, or even adoption. But I found that these resources are just really scattered across the internet. Like, it can almost be overwhelming because there are a lot of them, but there's not really one good place that I found where you can see every option that exists, and also the things that you need to consider as someone who might go through this option. Also, a lot of these options are super, super inaccessible due to expense, lack of coverage, especially in the United States. As we know, our healthcare system is a lot different than other countries. This picture on the right, within our Remember the Girls Facebook group, we asked women and carriers to share what words come to mind when they think of family planning. And you can see a lot of these words do have negative connotations, guilt, scared. But there are, more ones in there as well. There's hope. So, we really want to make women be able to feel more of these positive feelings and feel empowered to take action, and that they have the proper information and support when it comes to planning their family and having additional children, if that's what they choose to do. Remember the Girls received a grant from Myriad Women's Health to create a family planning toolkit. And the Family Planning Toolkit is meant to serve as a one-stop shop for carriers of X-linked conditions to learn about all the options that exist. They're all going to be presented equally, in a way that's unbiased, that's meant to be informative. So here are some of the aspects that are going to be in this online toolkit. We're currently working on an animated video right now with a science animation company about X-linked inheritance. And if you go on YouTube and you look up, X-linked diseases, there are videos like this already, but they really break X-linked diseases down into X-linked dominant versus recessive, which can be confusing because ALD was once considered X-linked recessive based on the understanding that women weren't affected. But now we know that that's not the case. And a lot of researchers and scientists and genetic counselors are just moving towards the general category of X-linked rather than breaking those down. But there's no videos that exist that don't break them down. There's also no videos that exist that mention the fact that women with X-linked conditions can be affected. So we felt like there was a really big gap to fill here. And of course, when you're going through family planning, it's vital to understand the inheritance of the condition that you carry. We're also involving multiple genetic counselors and experts to create informational videos about each option. So it's really similar to, if you were to go with a meeting at genetic counselor, what kind of things you would learn about the option, or if you were to see a genetic counselor present at a conference. So it is just a general overview of the option. We're also going to create some written resources as well. So, it is something that you can say, print and take with you, or if you want to read more closely, it's something that you can print and go through. We're also having testimonial videos of X-linked carriers who have gone through these experiences. And then as best as we can, we're going to include financial and insurance coverage information, which is really hard because there's actually not one place where you can go to find out where IVF is covered, what insurers cover it. That information is also scattered all over the internet. So we're going to try to compile that the best we can. And also resources like grants. I know there's a lot of confusion, and Dominique spoke to this a bit about can carriers apply for infertility grants? Because, we're not using IVF for infertility purposes, but more for genetic purposes. And for a lot of them, yes, you definitely can. And as we know, IVF can be insanely expensive. So we want to, have an ongoing list of resources that is continuously updated. And also directions to find a genetic counselor. We don't want this to take the place of meeting with a genetic counselor. Meeting with a genetic counselor is super, super important and vital, to better talk about your specific situation. I wanted to include these because these are actually from a couple years ago. These were the initial drawings that I had when I thought of the project. So you can see on the left, there's boxes or buttons for all these different options. An intro video about the purpose of the toolkit, explaining that no one option is best or right. It really depends on what you feel is right for you. And then on the right is more of what you would see within those specific options. So, what is IVF with PGT? A video explanation by a genetic counselor. There you can see 4 little testimonial clips, 3 carriers, and then also 1 couple. On the side, we felt like it would also be important to include, it from the couples aspect, because obviously when you're considering a family planning option, there's another person usually involved in that decision. So they're very integral to the conversation. And then trying to include pricing and insurance coverage and next steps to contact a genetic counselor. I think the strongest part of this toolkit really is these testimonial videos. I think it's so important to, once you know information about a family planning option, to actually hear stories of women who have gone through it and see what it's actually like. You can hear about the things that these other X-linked carriers have had to consider, what they liked about the option, what they found difficult, and also just the realities of these options. Definitely glad that these options exist, but that doesn't mean that they're easy or, simple to go through. And I think that's something we also need to take into consideration to mentally prepare ourselves. In the videos we have thus far, some carriers share that they really liked the option they chose and they would do it again. Others didn't have as good of an experience and maybe would have chose a different option. That's also why we're having multiple testimonials from multiple women for each option, just to kind of get those diversity of experiences. And also to remember that everyone's experience is different. Just because someone did have, a really positive experience with one option or a negative experience, you obviously, can apply that to your own, but these are more just a way to kind of guide your own decision-making process, to learn about what these other carriers considered and what it was like for them. And this photo here is of the Remember the Girls president, Emma. She's a carrier of not ALD, but a different X-linked disease. And she is sharing her story in our toolkit. So where are we now? This project is currently still being created. But so far we filmed 9 testimonial videos, and we have videos for IVF with PGT, natural conception with no testing, natural conception with prenatal testing, which would include amniocentesis and chorionic villus sampling, and egg donation. We're still looking for someone to share about adoption. And our goal is to have 20 plus videos. So if anyone on this call is, interested in sharing their experience with family planning, we would be so appreciative of that. We're also working with 6 genetics professionals to create educational videos for each option. And we're also have decided to make some additional sub videos. For example, and I'm really excited for this one because I never hear this talked about in the genetic sense, but we're having a fertility preservation expert talk about fertility preservation from the genetic standpoint. And, fertility preservation is when you save and freeze your eggs and then later use them for IVF. But I think this is so important, especially as a lot more women are having children older. Say that that one day you want to go through IVF, for example, but you don't know when that will be. Fertility preservation might be a possible option for you. It also is really expensive, so that is a major downfall. But we feel like this toolkit really needs to cover all bases and leave nothing out. It's our aim to have the first version of the toolkit on our website by the summer of this year. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And as I said, if you want to share your story, please send me an email. We record them over Zoom, and we send you a list of questions or things to consider beforehand. So it's definitely guided, but it's really up to you, the direction where you want to take it. And you can also message me on Facebook if you're friends with me on Facebook, I know many of you are. But always really appreciative of people volunteering their time to help, raise awareness of the issues that we face in our community. I also want to reiterate, as we know, family planning is really personal for X-linked carriers and their families. An option that maybe the favorable option of one person might not be of others. So it's, of course, remember to respect everyone's different opinions when it comes to family planning, and understand that people might have, certain views that are different than yours. I think as, women especially, we should feel empowered to feel in control here. I know often with ALD especially, you can feel like you don't have control of, what's going to happen in the future. And that feeling is very real. But I'm hoping that this toolkit can serve as a way to, empower carriers of ALD and other X-linked diseases to feel informed, feel like they know what their next steps are to, make those family planning choices. I think this toolkit will also be especially great because even though this is going to have, an X-linked genetics tilt to it, I think this will be a resource that can be used by carriers of other conditions or other hereditary diseases that might want to go through family planning as well. And that this toolkit should always supplement meeting with a genetic counselor. It's not meant to replace it, but just to be a additional resource where women can kind of go at their own pace to learn about these different options, and not necessarily feel overwhelmed of having to start from scratch in an appointment with a genetic counselor, because definitely a lot of information, it can be overwhelming. So we want this to be a place where, maybe you come on and you watch the videos about IVF, then a couple of days later, you revisit it, learn about a different option. So that's really the purpose. Yeah, that's the overview. As you can tell, I'm really excited about this project. And to join Remember the Girls, we do have a private Facebook group, and we do also recently started an affiliate group to specifically talk about X-linked genetics and pregnancy. I'll also send these in the chat if you want to join. There are a lot of women with ALD in both of these groups, but I think it's especially powerful getting to meet other women with other X-linked conditions and learn about those conditions, and that even though, the symptoms that affect us or our male relatives may be different, there's a lot that we have in common. So thank you. And if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to share.
Thank you, Taylor. This looks like such a huge undertaking, but I mean, you've got a grasp on it. I love the blueprints. I love that you shared that with us, because that's how it all starts, right? It's just jotting down the ideas. And if you look at the chat, there's just so much excitement from so many families and physicians about this. I do see one question. This is so great. Thank you so much. As the mama of a daughter and son with ALD, I'm wondering what supports there might be for boys. Donor sperm could be an option, as well as genetic testing and the other pieces you outline. Is the toolkit for girls only, or could it apply to boys?
That's a really great question. And I did recently talk about this with a few men in our community, how family planning is really only talked about in the sense of ALD, female carriers, and not talked about as often for men with ALD or AMN. The toolkit right now is meant for female carriers of ALD, but this is giving me something to think about, because I do think that it would be really beneficial to include something. Also, for, say, if a carrier has a son with an X-linked disease, they might want to, this could also serve as a place where they can learn what their son's future might look like, if their son wants to have a family. So that definitely gives me a lot to think about. But I think this needs to be a greater part of the conversation as well. Family planning is not just a woman's issue. It's an issue for our entire community, the rare disease community. So thank you so much for that question.
I love too that it will be something that we can just go to electronically. And I mean, Dominique touched upon this about, when you're ready to actually go and physically meet with the genetic counselor and have these conversations. I think this will be so nice that you can kind of look over this information at your own pace and feel a little bit more emotionally prepared too before having that sit down. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Taylor, thank you so much for being here today. We're all really looking forward to that. Summer 2022.
Yeah, I'll keep everyone posted. When it's ready, I'll definitely be posting it in all the ALD Facebook groups. So, if you're in those, you'll definitely see when it's available. Thank you. Thanks for letting me share.